Welcome back to Pet Shop Boys' documentary, The Parlophone Years.
It was probably quite good fun at the beginning. Actually, it wasn't like it is now. It was, you know, there weren't loads of sort of paparazzi hanging that I remember. And there weren't lots of gossip magazines and all of that, and there was no internet, so it didn't really seem to affect you too much, really. You could just carry on as normal and then just pop off to do Top of the Pops or something. I wasn't really that aware or that bothered about fame back then. It was something that we'd never really desired. We didn't do it to be famous or anything.
We're the Pet Shop Boys. We're the Pet Shop Boys.
I mean, we used to do a lot of promotion. We spent really the first 3 years of our career making records and doing promotion, making videos. That's what we did. We would go to Germany and do Peter's Pop Show, and then you'd have to do a photo session with Pop Rocky, Pop Magazine, or one of those magazines.
They normally wanted you to jump up as well, didn't they?
Yeah. Or because with the Pet Shop Boys, be with teddy bears and things like that. Mm. And actually, there was always a lot of rows going on because we had on our record sleeves this very minimal presentation, and we were very concerned about the design and the presentation of everything. And then you sort of go abroad and you're expected to do these sort of kitsch things that we didn't like. So the issues were never about fame, they were about presentation.
Integrity.
Yeah, integrity.
We've always wanted to maintain our integrity.
Then we posed for pictures with the competition winners and argued about the hotel rooms and where to go for dinner. And someone said it's fabulous you're still around today. You both made such a little, go a very long way. Yesterday, when I was mad and quite prepared to give up everything, admitting I don't believe in anyone's sincerity, and that's what's really got to me. Yesterday, when I was mad, admitting I don't believe in anyone's sincerity, and that's what's really got to me. Yesterday, when I was mad.
As the 1990s came to an end, so did the Pet Shop Boys' spell of commercial infallibility, their imperial phase. With 6 studio albums behind them, they now faced a future where they no longer had to chase hits. Instead, Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe ventured into the nightlife.
We decided in about 1997 that we were going to write a stage musical. And actually we were going to adapt Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, the stage musical. And we approached Stephen Daldry, who's become a film director since, but in those days he ran the Royal Court Theatre, and he did a production at the National Theatre of an Inspector Calls that we really liked, which is a very famous production. And we met him and we started, and then we couldn't get the rights to Brighton Rock. And so we decided to work with the playwright Jonathan Harvey, who'd had his big success with the play Beautiful Thing. And we started sort of slightly haphazardly writing a musical, which actually Jonathan Harvey came up with the title, Nightlife. We liked this title so much, we said, no, let's call the album Nightlife, we'll call the musical Closer to Heaven. And the sort of concept of the album was things that happened at night.
Was there something to do with how perceptions are different at night? That's
correct, isn't it? That's a go.
Yeah, imagine that, everyone. Well,
Yeah.
I've heard it enough times.
And it sort of follows that through, hence a song like You Only Tell Me You Love Me When You're Drunk, because maybe they're intoxicated or something like that.
What a performance tonight. Should I
Well, this is the era of the long song titles. We have You Only Tell Me You Love Me When You're Drunk. I Don't Know What You Want, But I Can't Give It Anymore. I mean, you could have called that Drunk, you could have called the other one I Don't Know What You Want. But we like the long song title. That's what the title is. Why should you edit it down? It was, again, sort of going against the grain. Even now it seems like a kind of Pet Shop Boys thing to do, doesn't it? Our big idea for this really, though, was electronics with an orchestra. And we approached the musician and composer Craig Armstrong, who'd worked a lot with Massive Attack and had his own solo album, The Space Between Us, which is a beautiful album. We also worked with David Morales, the DJ, and we worked with Rollo, because we very much liked his early to mid-90s dance records. It was interesting, as a side to this, when we were working with him in the studio, he said, I've just got to go and say hello to my sister. I'm helping her make an album. He didn't make a big deal out of it. And we all said hello to this young woman sitting outside in the studio reception. Of course, it was Dido, who was making an album that was about to sell 15 million copies. Whereas our album was about to sell about 1 million copies. But this was quite an interesting album to make, because we went to New York, worked with David Morales, and for some reason, Chris was in New York before I was, and he and David Morales started working on New York City Boy, so they had a track when I arrived in the studio. And because it was in New York City, I thought the title New York City Boy. A friend of mine who used to work at Smash Hits had moved to New York to work for an American magazine, and he'd been telling me about how his kids used to they lived in the suburb, and they used to like to go into Times Square and hang around with all the electrical shops and all the rest of it. And people have often said New York City Boy is incredibly gay. Actually, it's about a totally innocent kid going into New York from the suburbs and just looking at all the electrical shops, thinking how exciting it all is.
This was a great photo shoot, actually, because we were meant to go to Coney Island
on the New York
subway, but we kept getting on the wrong train, so we never actually got there. But the great thing about New York is that even though we were dressed like this with big black eyebrows and makeup and fright wigs and everything, not one person on the subway showed any interest at all in what was going on. They'd seen it all before. But it's a shame, because I've always wanted to go to Coney Island and we never made it. I love these orange wigs. It's a bit Bowie-esque, isn't it? I love the blurred faces. That gets around any retouching. We've gone a bit weird, haven't we? I mean, we finally lost the plot here.
7th Avenue meets Broadway.
There's some very beautiful songs in this album. I think there comes a period in what we do where we write quite a lot of beautiful and moody songs.
A particular favourite track of mine off Nightlife is Happiness is an Option. I like the idea that you can choose to be happy or choose to be sad. But there's a really great musical bit in that I really like, where Neil sings "It Isn't Easy," and it just gets me every time. That, which I think is it's very strong, very strong.
We produced it. One track we produced is actually based on Vocalese by Rachmaninoff, a piece of music I've always liked. When I used to have classical singing lessons in the early 80s, I said to my singing teacher, "Can't we do Vocalese by Rachmaninoff? Because it has no words, it's just R's." And I finally sang it on a record.
It is not
This is neither old nor new. It's always forever between sense and ambition, pleasure
For their first studio album of the new millennium, the Pet Shop Boys did what they'd always done. Something very different.
This is the album Release from 2002, when we decided we were going to reinvent the Pet Shop Boys.
We're a band. We've come back as a band. We've come back as a band. And we sort of made this ourselves, really.
Yeah.
Just got someone in to mix it.
And I'd bought a house in County Durham. We had a little studio in there. And I also had 2 electric guitars. And Chris, who doesn't normally like guitars, encouraged me to play the guitar along with the tracks. And so we make a sort of surprisingly guitar-y album. And then we asked Johnny Marr to come up. And Johnny Marr on this album plays on almost every track. And then we record percussion, live percussion. The excellent percussionist called Jodie Linscott plays on it. We've gone back. It's really a bit like Behaviour. It's a bit autumnal. It's a sort of broken-hearted album. This album really is better than you think. I think it's a really excellent selection of songs. One of the funny things about being the Pet Shop Boys is people have a very strong idea of what the Pet Shop Boys is. And when you're not that, some people, assuming they care, find it a bit frustrating or a bit puzzling. And so the first single from this album, which is a really beautiful song, I think, Home and Dry, just doesn't sound, it starts with what sounds like a guitar arpeggio, people say a bit like Every Breath You Take. Actually, it's Chris playing the synthesizer. It's full of vocal harmonies, quite unusually for us.
So my baby's on the road, doing business, selling loads, charming everyone with the sweetest smile. Oh, tonight, I miss you. Oh, tonight, I wish you could be here with me, but I won't see you till you've made it back again. Home and dry. Home and dry.
I don't think we'd have been thinking about what we'd have been doing after it. It's what we wanted to do then. And I mean, I think some of it had to do with its location as well. Neil's place was, quite remote. And I think that's reflected in the music.
It's quite northern, isn't it?
It's quite bleak. Not that your house is bleak in any way.
Neil lives in a very bleak... It's called Bleak House, actually.
It's actually called Bleak
Good title
House.
for a book.
We came from the far north, summered in Crimea, deserted the armed forces, had to disappear, made it to the free west on a chartered flight, so we could see what we trained to fight. We were in London. Let's do it. Let's break the law. We were in London. Tell it like it is. We were in London. Tell it like it is.
Sometimes when we do like a ballad that I sing in a high voice,
Tell it like it is.
we say, yeah, it's a Kermit song. Can we just imagine Kermit on the Muppets sitting, the green puppet singing it? And Chris remarked somewhere, oh God, you sound like Julie Andrews.
Well, it's the perfect diction, isn't it? It's the fact that you can hear the words very clearly. It can sound a bit prim and proper sometimes, can't it?
A captain with 7 children.
Ultimately, for some long-time Pet Shop Boys fans, their 8th album, Release, which came out in April 2002, was no laughing matter.
We did set out to reinvent the idea of the Pet Shop Boys, and I think whether you like the reinvention is a different matter, but we achieved what we set out to do.
Feeling like I'm stuck in a hole, body and soul, while you're out of control. Now I know why you had to go. Well, I think we both know that it had to be so. I've been trying not to cry when I'm in the public eye. Stuck here with the shame and taking my share of the blame while making fun plans that don't include you. I get along without you very well. Get along very well. I get along without you very well. I get along very well.
This album was originally called Home, and our friend, the photographer and artist Wolfgang Tillmans, who we'd got to know just before this, who did the controversial video for Home and Dry of mice in Tottenham Court Road Tube Station, he said, "Oh, what's the album called?" And we said, "It's called Home." Well, he made it quite clear, he thought that was a terrible title. And he knew his Pet Shop Boys. And he said, we should just call it something like, can't you just call it something like, I don't know, Release? Because it's a release. And we said, great title. And so, Release it became. And what Wolfgang, I think, was thinking of was it was a sort of a pun.
But it's also an emotional release.
An emotional
isn't it?
release and a record release.
I mean, Love is a Catastrophe. Cool.
Yeah. When you write a song that is your innermost thoughts, almost unedited, apart from put them into it to fit a meter, it's sort of embarrassing when people hear them. You have to sort of disguise. I prefer to disguise. Or sing it through an assumed character or something. On this album, there is no assumed characters at all. And Love is a Catastrophe. You know, I was feeling very down about something. And there it all is.
Love is a catastrophe. Look what it's done to me. Brought me down here so low. Stranded, nowhere to go. No concentration, just rerunning conversation, trying to understand how I fell into this quicksand. What happens next? With life I'm unimpressed. Pain like a cutter's knife. Never been lonelier in my life.
Chris wrote, the whole musical track, and I just sang this over the top of that. And I've always thought it's beautiful. It's more arpeggios, a lot of arpeggios on this.
A lot of arpeggios. I think we've done arpeggios now.
Yeah, I think we did them very
all of those.
conclusively on this.
Yeah.
It's a very, very, very bleak song. When we did the tour, with this album we started to tour, with Nightlife we started to tour a lot, but this album we really started to tour a lot. And we had a band with two guitarists and percussionists and ourselves. Chris playing keyboards and I played the guitar as well. And that was a very interesting thing because we'd traditionally toured with dancers and all the rest of it. And we went out as a band. And actually it went down quite well, funnily enough. I was with Bernard Sumner from New Order saying he thought it was our best show. I don't think he ever liked the wigs in Nightlife. And we really I personally learned a lot as a sort of performer, because I remember the first night of the tour thinking, oh my God, there's like no one else is going to start singing. So it was a really strong learning experiences. But Love is a Catastrophe was actually the sort of centrepiece of the show. It worked very, very well live.
Love is a catastrophe.
I think I have a mild obsession as to people's behaviour and whether people do things out of sort of unrestrained desire and instinct, or whether there comes a point where you decide to fall in love, for instance, which is what this is about. It's the last song on the album. It's called You Choose, and this is a very philosophical lyric. You don't fall in love by chance, you choose whether you slip off the cliff or jump off it. And it was also, I think, the first time we did what we call an Elton John Bernie Taupin, where I typed up the lyric and I handed it to Chris and he says to music. I was thinking it sounds about the Velvet Underground.
Lick your wounds, buy your booze. You won't get drunk by accident, you'll choose. Don't blame him for refusing your bid. He didn't decide to love.
When it came to the Pet Shop Boys' 9th studio album, produced by Trevor Horn in 2006, a political concept was fundamental to the project.
We decided after release with all guitars, we were going to make a very electronic sounding album. We also had an agenda for this album, which is broadly speaking a political agenda. We were going to make an album about the post 9/11 world, about this surveillance culture that had entered our lives, which has only ever grown since. And so we actually had a sort of an agenda for this album, which we wrote down on a piece of paper before we even started making the album. And so the album starts with the song Psychological, which is about fear.
Who's that knocking on the cellar door? It's psychological.
And it ends with the song Integral, which is sung from the point of view of an authoritarian government.
If you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. If you've something to hide, you shouldn't even be here.
So it is in fact really the closest thing we have to a concept album.
After having basically produced the last album, we probably thought we wanted a really great producer for the next one. And also it's really great being in the studio with Trevor Horn. I mean he's a fantastic producer, but also he's very entertaining. I like seeing the way he works. You don't really learn a lot because you never quite know what's been going on, do you? Sort of magic does happen at some point, but
normally at 2 a.m. after
I think after we've gone out for dinner and he carries on doing something. You definitely get something special with Trevor.
If you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. If you've something to hide, you shouldn't even be here.
I would call this pop with depth.
Depthy pop.
It's got musical depth. Actually, we returned to bombast with this. We hadn't done bombast since the last time we worked with Trevor. The Sodom and Gomorrah show, very bombastic. All through the album, we thought this is the first single. It's the kind of it's a sin of this album.
Sun, sex, sin, divine intervention, death and destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sodom and Gomorrah Show.
It's a long track, but it was very difficult to cut it down to like 4 minutes, 3 minutes 50, because when you did that, you'd somehow lost something. And what we noticed was by this time, compared with the 80s, radio is more conservative. In 1987, no one even mentioned to us that It's a Sin is 5 minutes long. No one said, oh, of course you're going to have to do a radio edit. And on this, we knew we would have to do we knew there's no way you could go to the radio with a 5-minute song anymore. Sometimes you can write a song and the impact of the song is in the length.
I lived a quiet life, a stranger to champagne. I never dared to venture out to cities of the plain. I heard about the way of life, took it with a pinch of salt. The freedom and the time to play, a life so easy, it intrigued me when you called to say, are you gonna go to the Sodom and Gomorrah show? It's got everything you need for your complete entertainment and instruction. Sun, sex, sin, divine intervention, death and destruction. The Sodom and Gomorrah show is a once-in-a-lifetime production.
I think people had a problem with the title as well.
In that they thought it was about sodomy or something. The title actually comes from the Bible. So really, I'd just taken the biblical story and sort of updated it. The Sodom and Gomorrah show in the song is meant to be about the media overreacting to everything, about celebrity culture, which has long been a sort of subject of ours. Whether within that extreme culture, love is possible.
I think it's true to say my life was changed that night. In the liberated atmosphere, all around me, someone found me, whispered in my ear. Are you gonna go to the Sodom and Gomorrah show? It's got everything you need for your complete entertainment and instruction. Sun, sex, sin, divine intervention, death and destruction. The Sodom and Gomorrah show is a once-in-a-lifetime production.
It's also quite experimental. There's this song, I Made My Excuses and Left.
It started off because I think we'd been to see the History Boys or something at the South Bank, and I decided to walk home, and it was raining, and I was feeling really miserable. And I remember I kept singing, I'm all alone again, I'm all alone. And so I sang it into my phone as I was crossing over Waterloo Bridge. But then it sort of developed more, and then I wrote lyrics, and it became about John Lennon meeting Yoko and how that then affected
Cynthia. So it's actually, it's story.
So it tells a really great story.
Because Cynthia Lennon wrote an autobiography, and she described how she went on holiday with some friends to Greece, and she came back to the house in Surrey, and sitting on the sofa was John and Yoko, and she realised it was over.
I walked into the room. Imagine my surprise. You were sitting close to him, staring in each other's eyes. Each of you looked up, but no one said a word. I felt I should apologize for what I hadn't heard. A silence filled the room, awkward as an elephant. In the crowded court of your love, I was now a supplicant. And clumsy as I felt at stumbling on this theft, to save further embarrassment, I made my excuses and left.
But then it has a happy coda, because when she realises it's not the end of her life, you know, life will go on, she will meet other people and have other happiness, and so it sort of has a happy end.
Like such a fool for crying. All that I know is when you feel inside you're dying, it all begins again, defying your excuses.
And of course, it's a very Pet Shop Boys thing, because it's really about English embarrassment as well. I'd had the idea of writing a song for a while called "I Made My Excuses and Left," because it's the sort of thing journalists write. And
also, there aren't many songs with the word supplicant in, are there?
There aren't.
You don't get that with everyone. You don't get that with Coldplay. Actually, you probably do.
You
probably do,
Coldplay.
actually, because the brainy pop stars.
Brainy pop stars. Yeah.